Thanks for watching The Importance of Cybersecurity During COVID-19, presented by General Dynamics Information Technology. I'm Francis Rose with the GovMatters Thought Leadership Network. In this special program, we'll cover how agencies and organizations have pivoted to remote work, COVID-19's long-term impact on IT operations in areas like autonomous cyber, plus the zero trust model in light of this next normal. Experts from U.S. Army Cyber Command, the Department of Homeland Security, and GDIT will join me. It's an important topic and a great lineup, so let's get started. Joining me, Ronald Pontius, Deputy to the Commanding General at U.S. Army Cyber Command, Teresa Lang, the Acting Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, and Matt McFadden, Director of the Cyber Center of Excellence at GDIT. Thanks all very much for joining me today. Mr. Pontius, I want to start with you. How have you seen the pivot to remote work go, both internally at Cyber Command and as you're providing support for the rest of the Department of Defense?
It's actually gone very well. And again, as the whole COVID pandemic really started, it was balancing how do we protect our own workforce at the same time to do the mission supporting the Army. And the Army's a large organization, 1.1 million users when you think about the active Army, the Army National Guard, the Army Reserve, and the civilian employees across the Army. It's a very large organization. And as the Army transitioned to telework and what we really call distributed operations, at the same time as we as Army Cyber Command, with our major network provider subordinate to us, which is our Network Enterprise Technology Command, or NETCOM, who is the principal Army provider, what we call Department of Defense Information Network, or DoDIN operations. And that's what NETCOM does for the Army under the command and control and guidance of Army Cyber Command. So as we really shifted, we had to significantly increase, phone conference bridges, video teleconference capability, virtual private network capacity initially to really provide the capability as users move from normal office locations to remote sites. And additionally, as we work through that, of course, many users, not enough, we didn't have government issued furnished equipment, typically laptops for all users, so it would go to what we call, non-government furnished equipment or people's home devices on their home networks, and what with that. So it was a transition period, and we ramped up, and it's actually going very well. A major capability the Department of Defense rolled out, really led by Mr. Dana Deasy, the DoD Chief Information Officer, was a Microsoft Teams capability called Commercial Virtual Remote. And that has really become a huge success across the DoD. But I can say in the Army, we have over 300,000 active users every day using this Commercial Virtual Remote for chat, video, file sharing on both government furnished equipment and non-GFE equipment, so users, and it's become very, very successful.
Ron, what has the hierarchy, the portfolio distribution, all of that been vis-a-vis the office, General Crawford's office, the CIO's office, G6, relative to Cyber Command, and has the response to COVID and the activity that you've had to undertake in the Army as a result of it changed that dynamic at all?
I would say it's a tremendous teamwork, partnership, collaboration. And General Fogarty and General Crawford absolutely refers each other as their Ranger buddies because they are really linked. General Crawford is responsible at the headquarters Department of the Army level for the policy and direction, strategic resourcing of information technology capability across the Army, and Army Cyber Command is the operational entity to operate and defend the Army portion of the networks, the data, and the systems. And it absolutely is critical that we're seamless between us. And as I said earlier, NETCOM, as the major subordinate command of Army Cyber Command, is really that operational entity. In addition, we have some very specially trained cyber mission forces for much more detailed defensive capability. But when we talk about the normal operate and defend. Netcom does that. But it's been a tremendous partnership, and how we have synced across the Army, as General Crawford has particularly done the engagement at the Office of Secretary of Defense level with, as I said, Mr. Deasy and the DoD CIO, and then in the operational chain, as we take operational direction from U.S. Cyber Command, headed by General Nakasone. We take the operational direction from that side, but it's been a tremendous partnership, and that has really paid dividends.
Teresa, welcome, and thank you for joining us from DHS today. How has that transition been? You are responsible for security in an organization that's just as complex as a military organization. What does that transition look like for you and your colleagues at DHS?
DHS has been very successful in this transition, and we've benefited from the very excellent decisions that were made by prior people. We were able to take our average daily load of teleworkers from 10,000 a day up to 7,000 a day without missing a beat. Our traffic to our Homeland Security Information Network has increased over 200%. Our VPN usage went up to 483%, more than it had been. VDI increased 255%, and collaboration on Teams, as one example, was up 438% in 30 days. All of this was possible because of prior planning. We had an enhanced infrastructure, we had enhanced collaboration capabilities. It was incredibly important that those decisions had been made and that the pieces had been put in place so that we could do this seamlessly.
What were the specific things that you were able to do as a result of that infrastructure that was pre-built that you might not have been had you not undertaken that extra work?
I think the continuation of every mission is what I would use to answer that. We didn't lose time in acquisition. We didn't lose time in executing any of the missions. We have success stories from every component. And just as an example, Immigration and Customs Enforcement scaled up to over 15,000 remote users in less than 3 days. The U.S. Coast Guard was able to increase their network gateway tenfold to accommodate the remote workers. TSA is looking at very innovative ways to increase training for all of their officers. CBP collaborated with us to make sure that we could scale for the VPN and Workplace as a Service solutions. The Federal Law Enforcement Training Center hosted a virtual graduation this spring, and it made it possible for one of the law enforcement communities to celebrate one of their team members that had been lost during the term. CISA has been very instrumental in monitoring the situation and making sure that there have been good communications with the public. They've made sure that people are aware of COVID-19 scams. They've talked about the increased cybersecurity required in a telework environment. So I would say that what we have gained is being able to continue successfully our mission set.
Teresa, I want to come back to some of the components that you talked about there and look at the component to a headquarters relationship later in our conversation if we have time. Matt McFadden from GDIT, welcome. Thanks for joining the conversation today. What are your customers in government talking to you about the biggest challenges, whether it's security or just logistics, as they've undertaken this transition and now what appears to be kind of moving toward a long-term phase of people being off-site?
Yeah, so that was one of the biggest challenges. Overnight, I mean, in nearly a week, most of the workforce went remote. So more so than ever, I mean, they were dealing with lots of threats, data overload, increased use of cyber tools. And essentially in a week, they had to move essentially cyber operations as well as their technologies into a remote state. So we're seeing a lot of enablers such as Zero Trust to help drive a lot of what they're doing from a cyber strategy standpoint. But from a customer standpoint, we've working with a lot of cloud providers to help scale the environments. We're seeing increased use of VPNs and resource utilization. So kind of rescaling the network architecture to support those needs. And, just overall, I think besides the technology, there's the operational aspect of, from a cyber ops standpoint, these operators are used to maybe accessing their data on premise or at a facility. So how do I provide those robust operations, from a remote setting?
What have been the biggest challenges for organizations to do that, Matt? The rapidity that you just talked about and that others have told me about through this has been striking, I think, because I'm not sure somebody would have predicted that government agencies would be able to transition as quickly as they have. What have they run into as they've tried to do that? And are there common threads among the security challenges that agencies have had as they've tried to do these transitions?
I think a lot of their selection has been around, risk tolerance. And I think in the advent of COVID-19, that risk tolerance has essentially lowered, to help enable, the business. So I think in that case, we've seen the increased leverage of, cloud technologies to help, improve the scalability, the delivery. I think one of the other important pieces is, a lot of agencies had to be more open to, collaboration tools, things that they haven't been used to adopting. Some good examples are like Zoom for Gov, or adopting more WebEx, or some of the Google's new Meet capabilities, and driving ways that there's acceptable use, increased compliance, but most importantly, helping to enable that zero trust architecture or strategy.
Ron, Matt used the term risk tolerance, and I wonder if the Army's risk tolerance framework has changed as a result of COVID-19. Are there things that you're willing to try that you maybe wouldn't have been willing to try 3 months ago? And if so, why so? And if not, why not?
Yeah, it is about balancing, again, as I said earlier, protection of the force and protection of the mission. And it is a different environment. So there are some new factors that go in that risk assessment, risk correlation. As an example, as we've gone to more and more, rapidly, as you said earlier, to remote users, that clearly has increased our attack surface for adversaries. And so that has to go into consideration. People using their home networks to connect into the Army network or the larger DoD network, really, because it is truly a joint network. And we just operate and defend the Army portion of it. But that risk calculation has been very important, and it's a measured. So I believe there's been the good balancing of that, because it has to be protect the force, protect the mission, and balance it. The commercial virtual remote that I talked about, that is General Nakasone approved that to be used. It's an impact level 2 environment, and to do the file sharing, et cetera, but it's not full, what we call classified user information. So there's no PII, privately, PII or health information or law enforcement information used allowed in that environment. But it is an environment that is, I'll say, more permissible than the normal impact level 2. But it's only going to be up for 6 months, and then that environment will be taken down, and all the data will be wiped clean, and that's part of the risk mitigation.
Up next, I'll drill down on one possible long-term impact of the coronavirus pandemic on IT operations across government. The case for autonomous cyber. Right after this, you're watching the importance of cybersecurity during COVID-19 on the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network. Stay with us.
The importance of cybersecurity during COVID-19 is brought to you by General Dynamics Information Technology. Learn more at gdit.com/cyber.
Welcome back to this special program, The Importance of Cybersecurity During COVID-19, presented by General Dynamics Information Technology. I'm your host, Francis Rose. The number of users logging onto government networks remotely jumped dramatically when coronavirus became a pandemic. It's a scenario that makes securing those networks harder and makes the case for autonomous cyber easier. Let's learn more now. Here again, Ronald Pontius, Deputy to the Commanding General at U.S. Army Cyber Command, Teresa Lang, Acting Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, and Matt McFadden, Director of the Cyber Center of Excellence at GDIT. Thanks all of you for continuing the conversation. Ron, I'll start with you. Let's expand on that idea of zero trust first that we talked about in the first part of our conversation. What does that look like to the end user inside the Army who doesn't know cyber from a hole in the wall? How does he or she work differently or do things differently as a result of implementation of a zero trust policy?
Well, hopefully at the end of the day, it is actually much easier for the end user. And I'll take an example of where we have identified what is a gap during this environment that we are working diligently to solve. And that is for the classified remote users. We had devices for key leaders and individuals that could connect to the secret internet that we have in the Department of Defense. But we recognize with remote operations, there is a much greater need than we have the availability of those devices. So we are working now to stand up, leveraging what's called commercial solutions for classified, what the National Security Agency has had out for several years of devices that we can, an environment we can set up. And so a user could use, a common device, not a special device, and come in a virtual desktop infrastructure, a VDI infrastructure, spin up that environment, have the classified session, either voice or receiving their classified email, and when it's all over, the environment is disestablished. There's no data ever goes to the device. It's all on the infrastructure. So that's an example where we're absolutely heading to be it much easier on the end user to be able to do their work. In this case, to access the classified information, which is typically quite common across the Department of Defense.
Ron, there's a concept there that I want to come back to later in our conversation if we have time. But Teresa, I'm curious what your view is of what zero trust looks like to the end user, whether she can tell a difference or not when DHS has fully implemented a zero trust posture.
I believe the user will find enhanced capabilities. I think it's going to be much easier for them to get to the things that they need to do. It's going to, the unification of the cloud, mobile, and legacy environments will make the workplace easier for people to deal with. It should be transparent to the user, except for enhanced capability. CIO at DHS has already started a zero trust action group. They've already completed their first use case, which is conditional access and rights management, and they're already planning on how to roll this out department-wide. We're looking at a 2-year timeline with 90 and 100-day sprints, and each sprint is designed to add capability to enhance the user experience and make sure that they're able to do everything that they need to do while enhancing security rigor and making sure that there's no disruption. And we have major phases of implementation that we're looking at. We have the conditional user access to information and applications. Then we're looking at context-based endpoint management and remote access modernization. And those are the next ones that we'll be looking at.
Teresa, you just laid out the landscape there in such an eloquent way that I haven't heard it described before, and I'm going to steal it, and I'll make sure I give you credit. Explaining it, though, so simply, cloud, mobile, and legacy environment. That's really the lay of the land for somebody in your profession. Is there an opportunity, because of how rapidly this is changing, for security professionals across government to say, maybe we wouldn't have been able to do this, whatever this is, fill in the blank, if it weren't for the COVID environment, we wouldn't have been able to execute something. We wouldn't have been able to execute it so fast. If that's the case, what do you think that opportunity is? What are you seeing at DHS, or what do you think other agencies should be looking for as far as opportunities to maybe push or force things that couldn't have happened in a pre-COVID environment, push things for the good?
I wouldn't say that there's anything we're doing that couldn't have happened. What I will say is that it's given us impetus to move forward with a lot of things that were already in the planning phases, and to make sure that we're actually working them quickly instead of running pilots and making sure that everything is perfect before we step out. So it has given us the opportunity to implement more quickly, or perhaps the motivation to implement more quickly. I think the collaboration capability is probably the prime case. You can collaborate in the office, in a meeting room with people sitting around the table. It requires specific capabilities if you're going to do it virtually. And we already had Microsoft 365 set up. We had the Teams environment set up. But again, according to our numbers, the Teams collaboration increased over 438% in 30 days. So we had not been using it to its optimum capability. And I think having a situation where we had all of the excuses off the table and we needed to collaborate virtually has made it easier for us to step forward in other areas.
Matt, what are some of the potential issues that an agency can run into when it's trying to do some of these things that maybe were on the books already and we're going to be, as Teresa said, we were going to do this as a pilot. Now we don't have the luxury of doing this as a pilot. Now this has to happen, and it has to happen quickly. What are some of the things that you've seen agencies run into as they've tried to really hit the gas pedal on things like this?
So adopting zero trust, I think, is more of a phased approach, and I think many times agencies try to adopt it all at once. And I think the challenge is it isn't necessarily a bolt-on approach, more so as a net new approach. And I think that's why developing those pilots are very significant. And I think the challenge is if you're a very large government agency with many networks, many endpoints, many organizations controlling various aspects of the network, it makes it very, very challenging to adopt a zero trust strategy. So I think back to that net new pilot and phasing it into parts of your organization is important.
There are two factors here that strike me as a challenge that maybe people weren't anticipating in a pre-COVID environment that have come together, and I'm curious about how you all are looking at dealing with them. And those two factors are the speed that you've all talked about and the volume that you've all talked about. The confluence of those leads me to believe it's not going to be possible to keep providing security in a visible, transparent way the way you've done it, or the way people have done it in the past with people. There's going to have to be an automated component here. Ron, I want to start with you, and I'll go around the horn. What are you looking at as far as automating cybersecurity, and what are the steps that you're taking toward trying to think through and then implement some type of automated strategy in the Army?
Yeah, and I'll come at it from two ways. First is we censor our networks and our endpoints across the DoD, but I'll focus on the Army, tremendous amount. And so we have worked really hard over the last 4 or 5 years to have a big data platform, big data analytics capability, so that we have automation that is queuing in based on having analytics, queuing in so your limited number of analysts know where to look about some anomalous behavior. And so the network is absolutely meant to be with a big data analytic environment. And we're bringing together enhanced data, not only the network and sensor data, but also complementing that with information from the intelligence community that, what adversary behavior is happening around the world. And it also helps us clue in an automated way to look for those activities of adversaries. And then the second way of which the DoD as a whole is really working towards this is to have an endpoint detection and response, so that we get to not only that we know what's happening, but that within certain parameters or rules, there is automated actions taken, not waiting for an analyst to do something. Now, clearly that can't be about everything, but it can be absolutely many, many things, because it's at the speed of which you work. When if an adversary gains access to your network, the adversary can move laterally fairly quickly. And so speed is absolutely essential. And so that endpoint detection and response is a really high priority across the DoD to bring in automation on the detection and response.
Teresa, what does automation look like in security at DHS? What areas do you think show the most promise, most potential? I guess maybe low-hanging fruit's a hackneyed phrase, but it sounds like it's appropriate here. Where do you see automation fitting into the security picture?
We're looking at automation in absolutely every process to see what we can do with it. We're looking at everything from automating specific parts of the assessment and authorization process all the way up to our continuous diagnostics and mitigation program, the CDM program. And we've made a lot of headway with that program, making sure that we can get the metrics so that we understand what our risk posture is. It's very important to have those metrics and be able to see what the entire picture is. So now we have internally to DHS, we have 10 of 11 planned components that are reporting data to our agency dashboard. And those 10 are also able to calculate aware scores so that we understand our vulnerability posture. So we are making headway with it, and we're going to continue automating every process that makes sense.
Matt, is there anything, I don't mean this to sound all pie in the sky, but is there anything, any area of security that automation wouldn't be appropriate for? Or is there a point where cybersecurity can be completely automatic and completely autonomous?
Yeah, so autonomous cyber defense automation is, a big part. I would say of every area in cyber. There's not one area that you can't automate, and I think the challenge really becomes is most cyber operators and analysts, they're performing a very, very manual process, and a lot of times they get caught up on these tier one items that takes a significant amount of their time. So in some agencies where we've brought autonomous cyber defense, leveraging what we call SOAR tools, security orchestration, automation, and response, we've been able to reduce their response times about 80% in some cases. So I think it depends where you want to apply it and where it's most applicable to the organization. That could be on phishing emails. That could be on compliance. That could be on detecting new threats, zero-day attack. I think it's just for every agency to really understand where can they get the best value of leveraging automation.
Thank you all very much for a terrific conversation. Couldn't be more timely, and the information you shared today couldn't be more useful. Thanks very much. And thank you for watching this special program, The Importance of Cybersecurity During COVID-19, presented by General Dynamics Information Technology. For more information on the subject matter we discussed today, go to govmatters.tv/GDIT. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Francis Rose.